The fifth best thing about The Lost Crown is its in-depth combat system. Well, I suppose it's not super deep, but it's miles above even the best Metroidvanias. Hollow Knight has a simple and effective nail swipe that has tons of different uses, like bouncing off of enemies, and that's a great combat system that evolves throughout the game as more complex enemies and bosses are introduced, while The Lost Crown only has its dual swords, but it offers combos and different button inputs to create a more free-flowing and exciting combat system. Things like stick tilt as well as light and heavy attacks give The Lost Crown a more action game feel that adds to the cinematic flair of the game. It's no fighting game, but having these options gives you more ways to deal with enemies in flashier ways, making the combat more satisfying on a catharsis level. The fourth best thing about The Lost Crown is the uniqueness of its time travel powers. We've seen games that use time manipulation in fascinating ways like Zelda, and we've seen them used as lazily as possible in Quantum Break. What makes The Lost Crown's abilities so interesting is that it's not as basic as reverse time or pause time. Instead, time manipulation is used as an excuse to introduce rarely seen platforming mechanics and incorporate them into the Metroidvania structure. The powers don't follow any type of sense when it comes to what time manipulation should be capable of, but that's because they're not supposed to. They're meant to be platforming mechanics with a loose justification for their existence. That's why the encounters on Mount Calf are so loopy and nonsensical. The developers are sacrificing logic and coherence in order to strengthen the gameplay, and I adore it. They know it doesn't make sense how these powers work, but they're willing to overlook that in order to boost the platforming. So many games feel limited by this story that they don't allow for fantastic gameplay mechanics, and I love that The Lost Crown rejects that. The third best thing about The Lost Crown is how it doesn't slouch on platforming. Metroidvanias are amazing at traversal and exploration, but so few of them genuinely master making the environment the true enemy. When I think of frustrating non-boss encounters in Dread and Hollow Knight, my mind comes back to specific enemy types with annoying tactics, like requiring a specific type of attack to defeat. Every enemy in The Lost Crown is weak to swords, but it balances this by having constant platforming roadblocks to overcome. Yes, a fair share of them are your standard spike pits, but when combined with the time powers, The Lost Crown is able to make platforming sections that can't translate to any other game. While boss fights are still the primary roadblocks to completing the game, it's the platforming that makes up the meat of the challenge. The second best thing about The Lost Crown is the memory shards mechanic. While I don't understand why Metroidvanias have minimalistic maps when they are the games that people get lost in the most frequently, the memory shards are a fun way to balance accessibility with a challenge. While the game is more than capable of automatically showing you a picture of every room in the game, placing these markers in rooms of your choosing really adds to the adventure and exploration vibes that Metroidvanias are known for. Although this feature is nice to have, I mainly used it for marking challenges I needed to return to, instead of its intended purpose of mapping out the area. But that's a testament to how well designed the map is that I wasn't getting lost, except for that one garbage level where they take the map away from you as a stupid way to add artificial difficulty. The worst thing about The Lost Crown is the inevitability that comes with resurrecting the franchise, and that's the staleness of its setting. Ubisoft has single-handedly made historically accurate and real-world mythology games feel bland, with how they constantly push them out over all their franchises. Immortals Phoenix Rising, Skull and Bones, and of course Assassin's Creed. Ubisoft has made these rich settings stale by creating inferior products to match these legendary historical times. This is because Ubisoft wants to add depth and a sense of history to their world, but they don't want to put in the time to write it. And that's fair. Elder Scrolls and Zelda have had decades to build their worlds, where it's now impossible for them to have shallow entries. The other option is adapting worlds to build out, like CD Projekt has done with The Witcher and Cyberpunk. And Ubisoft is doing more adaptation games, but they're choosing popular IPs rather than ones that are fascinating to explore. But Ubisoft doesn't want to pay licensing fees, so they turn to the public domain. And while the Persian mythology is vastly different from the Greek one, it's already played out. Stylistically, it's too similar to stand out, and it comes across as diet Assassin's Creed. But that's where the best thing about The Lost Crown comes into play, and that's its unashamedness to be as anime as possible. While its colour scheme and architecture leave much to be desired, the aesthetic of The Lost Crown is fabulous. When faced with the problem of standing out from Assassin's Creed, the developers went above and beyond to make sure this experience is far more animated. From the phenomenal cutscene choreography to the over-the-top style of boss fights, this is one of the only video games ever to have what is known as the Mappa effect. Instead of telling a grounded tale, The Lost Crown borders on parody with its ludicrously octane narrative and Spider-Verse level spectacle boss attacks. The Lost Crown wears its inspiration as a badge of honor, doing as much as possible to separate itself from its rival franchise, and it's that unmitigated love for anime that secures the franchise's place in the modern day.